Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. The Mega Drive or Genesis has some really great games in its library. Games like Sonic 2, Streets of Rage, Gunstar Heroes and Cast of Illusion are still fun to play to this day, along with a whole host of other classics. But as with any system, there's also a bunch of games out there that are just plain bad. This might be because of the game design, the controls, graphics, or more often than not, a combination of all of the above. So in this video, we're going to take a look at some of the worst games that you can get for Sega's 16-bit console. So, how about I shut up, you press that subscribe button, and we take a look at some games. Beast Wrestler is a terrible 2D fighting game released in 1995. Developed by the obscure studio Marubeni, who I can see why never made it big. It offers a unique blend of wrestling mechanics and creature combat, and it's all done really badly. In Beast Wrestler, you get to choose from a selection of admittedly kinda cool anthropomorphic characters. You've got robots, snake things, minotaur things, blobs of goo and more, and each one has its own set of moves and abilities, and then you're thrown into what are meant to be exciting wrestling matches in an arena. Despite the old-timey fantasy look of things, this is all part of a futuristic combat sport, where they fight for the glory of their respective factions. You do get a story mode and a versus mode, though neither are fun. The main issue with the game is immediately noticeable. As soon as you touch the controls, you're meant to have access to a variety of attacks and wrestling techniques, as well as monster-like powers such as slams, throws and special attacks. But the controls are just awful, and you would have as much fun controlling this if you unplugged your controller. It's all slow to respond, and often pressing a button doesn't seem to do anything at all. You have some basic attacks like punches, but there's also grapples, a lot of which seem to be shed between characters. But I couldn't tell you how to use them, it just seemed random if it even worked at all. There are special moves, but good luck getting them to work. What doesn't help is the erratic AI, especially in the story mode, where opponents will either stand there taking a beating or decide it's time for you to die. There really is no in-between. Graphics wise, it's almost good. The character designs are heavily influenced by classic kaiju and mythical creatures with oversized monsters, but the animation is stiff and minimal, with some characters sharing a lot of attack animations as well. It's just lazy. It's amazing that this game was even released as it is. Technical flaws significantly hinder any enjoyment you might have. Avoid this one like the plague. We might as well have another crap fighting game with Pit Fighter, a port of the arcade game. I was going to say the smash hit arcade game, but I'm not even sure if that's true. With this, we were promised the adrenaline pumping action of underground combat delivered to our home consoles, but no, it's crap. The gameplay here is straightforward. It's a one-on-one fighter that lets you choose from a whopping 3 characters. You can choose from the burly Buzz, the muscular Kato, and the athletic Tai. Each has their own unique moves and fighting style, but these differences are subtle and you probably won't feel much distinction in terms of gameplay. Though I do feel like I did play better whenever I was Buzz, so I could just throw people around like they were rag dolls. The combat mechanics are just bad though. The controls are clunky and moves don't always register when you're trying to do them, leading to pretty frustrating moments during the combat. This lack of precision makes the fights feel like more sluggish brawls than intense strategic clashes that it claims to have. The game takes place in a sort of 3D space, letting you go up and down in the arena as well as left and right. Basically, you want to play it like games like Streets of Rage, where you walk above your opponent and just hammer the attack button and they'll walk into you so you can do some damage to them. Then just walk away and repeat. But of course they will sometimes just ignore your attacks and get you back. Or if you're feeling cheeky, you can press A and B at the same time to pick up your opponent and throw them. You don't really have combos here though, it's just a case of smashing the attack buttons. Apparently there are special moves, but I couldn't figure any out or get them to work. The controls are just bad. The AI of the enemies is another problem. Like Beast Wrestler, there seem to be 2 main modes: stand around and let you beat them to a pulp, or maybe your opponent will just spam moves and rely on cheap tactics so you can barely do anything to them. This means it's repetitive, trial and error gameplay, and it often ends in frustration. Some stages even have weapons in them that you can pick up and either throw or beat your opponent with. These are worth getting if you really have to play it, as they don't seem to be able to block them. As you can see, the game has digitized sprites, a technique that was pretty popular in the early 90s, as seen in the arcade with other games like Mortal Kombat, but here they're just super awkward and bad, with really jerky animations that make them appear stiff and pretty unnatural. It also doesn't help that the game has very dodgy hit detection. And they're also pixelated that often it's hard to see the details, and the characters often look like they're pixely bits of vomit. You get a few different arenas to fight in, ranging from gritty alleyways to neon-lit fighting pits, but these all feel strange and empty without anything really exciting going on. There's very little environmental interaction, though sometimes a member of the crowd will come out and try and attack one of you. The soundtrack in Pit Fighter is also forgettable. There's some generic techno beats playing in the background, and the sound effects like punches landing and the crowd cheering are pretty much lackluster as well, using the crappy side of the Mega Drive sound chip. While this was an early attempt at bringing digitised graphics to the home console and had some unique features for its time, it does have really bad controls, repetitive gameplay, and very poor visuals. It's a chore to play this one, and you'll likely leave it alone after just a few minutes. I really don't think there is actually such a thing as a good version of Pit Fighter, but hey, if you want real suffering, my first experience with the game was on the Commodore 64. Dark Castle on the Mega Drive is one of my least favourite games of all time. I bloody hate it. Originally released in 1991, the game is a port of the 1986 Macintosh game. That version was initially praised for its blend of platforming and puzzle solving, though I haven't played it myself, so can't tell you if it's good or not. But on the Mega Drive, it is a fantastic blend of crap controls, frustrating mechanics, bad graphics, and annoying sound. The premise of Dark Castle is simple. You are the hero, and you've got to journey through a dangerous and foreboding castle to defeat the evil Black Knight and free the kingdom from his oppressive rule. It's basic fantasy stuff. The game itself is a side-scrolling action game that mixes platforming with some light puzzle solving and inventory management. You control the most useless hero I've ever seen. You're armed with nothing but a slingshot and a limited number of rocks. Your goal is to navigate through various rooms and courtyards, avoiding traps, solving puzzles and dispatching enemies to ultimately reach the Black Knight at the end of the castle. It's all basically trial and error here, and the levels are filled with obstacles like moving platforms, spiked walls, and a variety of enemies, including rats, crows, and the Black Knight's minions. It's all done on a screen-by-screen basis, and you aren't really given any clues on what to do on each screen, which would be fine if the game didn't play so badly. There's loads of badly drawn enemies, and of course it's one hit and you're dead. This creates a sense of frustration, but also the strange compulsive drive to keep trying. Mainly because I hate this game so much, I don't like the fact that it beats me every time I do try playing it. I do get over it though. The combat here is just bad. Your slingshot has a good range, but to attack you have to rotate your arm until it's at the angle that you want to throw, and then you attack. It is slow and unresponsive, and the fact that you often have about 10 or more enemies on screen at any one time, all coming from different angles, means that you don't get a chance to hit them before they get you. Couple that with the fact that your character literally trips over all the time. If you so much as brush a rock, it just makes things even more frustrating. The game also has a variety of puzzles that require a lot of patience to solve. Some of these involve timing, while others require figuring out how to interact with the environment or to use items in your inventory. There's a lot of things to climb, but good luck trying to grab a rope or ladder when you're in a hurry. It's almost impossible thanks to the controls that often can't be bothered to work. Graphically, Dark Castle is actually a bit of a mixed bag. Some of the animation on your character and enemies is actually decent for the time, but the colour palette often makes it hard to distinguish important elements, and some of the items are easy to miss. And also, some of the characters here just look like they're drawn by children, like the dragon that looks like it was done on Microsoft Paint. I think that the thing that annoys me most about this is it really could have been a cool game. The setting and premise are right up my alley, but the execution is just awful and it's no fun to play, so make sure you do. Next up is X-Perts. You are the X-Perts, a crack team of 3 operatives, including Shadow, who we all know from the Eternal Champions games, right? An evil corporation called Janus are being dicks and trying to take over the world. So the 3 of you, Shadow, Zack and Tashiel, because we all know someone called Tashiel, infiltrate their base so you can take them down from the inside like the good X-Perts you are. The game is an action platformer where you take control of all 3 characters at the same time, which is actually a really cool idea. Each one has their own abilities and traits, and you'll need to use their unique skills to complete the various objectives that you're given on each stage. At the start of each level, well, I presume, as I've never actually made it past the first one, you're dropped into the enemy base at different locations, and then you need to explore the base and hack into terminals or destroy various things or fight enemies. Each character can look after themselves for the most part, but you will need to switch between them at times if you want to hack certain systems and so on. Switching characters is easy enough. You go into the pause menu where you can see your objectives, as well as where your characters are on the map and the objectives, which is pretty handy. Then you need to choose your character and get them to make their way to the objective. The thing is that sometimes the way is blocked, and you'll need to send another character to a different part of the map in order to use a terminal to open a door or power a room, that sort of thing. Again, on paper, this is actually a really cool idea, but as with basically all the games here, the execution is just awful. The game is really meant to be played with a 6-button controller, but I don't have one of those, so it's a clunky mess of pressing multiple buttons at the same time to do various actions like hacking or getting your weapons out. But even if you do have a 6-button controller, it doesn't mean the game's going to be good. Hacking is done in real time and you can't do anything to speed it up. Instead, you're meant to just wait there and then switch to another character and get them to do something useful in the time in between until it's done. There's plenty of enemies, but they're all useless. They just walk awkwardly at you for the most part, and they're not hard to beat up. Characters do have a few moves that you can do, just some punches and kicks, but it's also awkward thanks to sloppy controls and really crappy animation. And yes, of course the hit detection is awful as well. Even your projectile weapons often feel useless, which is a shame. In terms of graphics, well, look at it. It uses ugly pre-rendered sprites like Donkey Kong Country, but bad ones. The characters are large and fairly detailed, but still manage to be blurry and bad looking. And as mentioned, the animation is just laughable almost everywhere here. The characters look so awkward even when they're just walking left or right. It really is not good. And as soon as you touch the controls, it's another game that you know is going to be bad. Once again, this is a real shame, as the actual premise here is a good one, and this really could have been a fun game, but it's just so poorly done with confusing levels, bad graphics, bad controls, bad combat, bad just about everything, that it's never fun to play. It's one of those games that as soon as you start playing, you want to turn it off again.
Combat complete. Tashio active.
Platform game time now, with Awesome Possum kicks Dr. Machino's butt, developed by the pretty much universally awful Tectoy. This game takes a lot of inspiration from Sega's own Sonic the Hedgehog, and of course does everything it can to make this as bad as possible. It follows the adventures of a genetically engineered possum called Awesome Possum, a laid-back but determined hero with a penchant for environmental activism. His mission is to stop the evil Dr. Machino, a villain hell-bent on polluting the planet with his evil machines. Sound familiar? Awesome Possum is voiced with a snarky, punkish attitude, and he occasionally breaks the fourth wall with attempts at humorous one-liners that attempt to endear him to the players. But his cool personality is just awful and annoying, and anyone that goes around telling you how awesome they are obviously have confidence issues, as he should. Awesome Possum is of course a side-scrolling platform game with a familiar structure reminiscent of the Sonic games, in terms of the level design and speed, or attempted speed at least. You'll guide Awesome through a bunch of stages filled with enemies, hazards and collectibles, and each level offers a mixture of standard jumping sequences and occasional puzzle solving, but the gameplay lacks the fluidity and polish of any others really. Awesome Possum can perform a basic jump and spin attack to eliminate his enemies, which are basically all robots. However, he's not agile at all, and as is a common theme here, the control is just bad. It's unresponsive and stiff, particularly when compared with the fast-paced precision of games like Sonic, and it is trying to be like that. But the lack of fine-tuned responsiveness in jumping and movement makes the game frustrating to play, especially in later stages with more intricate platforming challenges. The level design feels uneven, some stages almost threaten to be enjoyable, but soon become tedious due to their repetitive design and overly tricky jumps. There's enemies all over the place as well, usually shoved in at random locations that you have no chance of avoiding, with loads of blind jumps and fast running everywhere. Visually, the game always struggles to even look good in stills. It has a strange grainy look to everything, and the colours are all washed out. The character sprites and enemy designs are just robots, so nothing special. The animation of Awesome Possum is also terrible. There's a few frames of all the characters, but it's super choppy. It kind of looks like this footage here has been tampered with, but no, this is how the game plays. It feels terrible, and the choppy frame rate and lack of smooth scrolling makes everything harder as you just can't react. It's more like playing a flipbook than a video game. You're also forced to answer some conservation questions at the end of each stage, which I suppose is a noble effort, but it doesn't add anything to the game. You don't get penalised for getting them wrong really, other than not getting any bonus points, so you'll probably end up ignoring them for the most part, not that you're going to be in a rush to get back to the platforming. So yeah, this is just not a good game. Poor graphics, poor control, bad hit detection, unavoidable enemies, bad level design, it's got it all. And finally for today, here is Sword of Sodan, a side-scrolling action game that attempts to deliver a brutal fantasy experience filled with sword fights, magic and dark medieval world, but as we've heard before here in this video, is so poorly executed with questionable design choices, it's just a chore to play. Set in a mythic sword and sorcery world, the story of Sword of Sodan revolves around the heroic struggle of a warrior named Sodan, who is tasked with defeating evil forces that threaten the land. It's a fairly standard plot for a fantasy game, and you don't get a whole lot of story during the game, not that you're going to be that bothered. You'll need to make your way through a series of hostile landscapes ranging from forests to castles, but the game's design will just break your enjoyment. The gameplay is simple. You move from left to right, and that's about it. You can choose to play as either a male or female character. They each have slightly different moves and slightly different strength, etc., but the actual controls for each of them are the same. You basically just need to battle through waves of enemies, ranging from foot soldiers to larger, more grotesque creatures, until you get to the end of the level. The combat is built around a combination of button presses for attacks, with special moves and magic available, depending on the character's timing and positioning. Ultimately though, this is where the game's first major flaw becomes evident, and you'll never guess what: the controls are unresponsive and clunky, especially when trying to execute more complex attacks. I just didn't bother. The game's combat feels slow and cumbersome at best, which can be very frustrating when you're facing multiple enemies at once, which is most of the time. Your character's movement is heavy and slow, and for some reason you move like you've shit yourself the whole time. And while you can attack in different directions, the controls lack any fluidity, and the lack of precision really is a huge detriment in a game that clearly needs quick reflexes. The enemies here aren't exactly smart. They just walk in and try and attack you at random intervals, often when they're still nowhere near you, but they can also block, which as far as I can tell, you can't. Of course, they've made sure that the hit detection is as bad as possible as well, so even when you clearly do hit someone, it doesn't mean they'll actually take damage. Also, to turn around, you have to press a button and the direction you want to face, so when there are multiple enemies, which again is most of the time, you're going to take a lot of damage. You collect potions as you play, which you can access from the pause menu. These do a few things like restoring your health, making your attacks more powerful, or making you slightly faster, or more often, having no effect at all. You also fight bosses, which are a pain in the ass thanks to the really bad hit detection and the fact that they always have a much larger range than you, so getting near them is often nearly impossible without taking any damage. Graphically, the game looks kinda bad. The character designs are bulky and do have detail on them, but they just look bad and derpy, the actual designs themselves. The animation in particular is just awful everywhere. How they thought this was okay is anyone's guess. The backgrounds, while not actually too bad, can feel repetitive, and the whole level design lack any variety, and you just move to the right slowly, looking for the nearest toilet from the looks of things. The sounds are also strange. There's barely any music here. Instead, you basically just listen to bird noises. No idea why. The other sounds are generic swishes and grunts, and it gives the game a really strange feel to it. This is another game that, on paper, could have been fun, but they just decided to make the most awkward, hard-to-control game that they could and totally ruin the experience. Good job, EA. So there you go, some of the worst games you can play on the Sega Mega Drive, or Genesis. Which ones have you played, and what are some other bad games for the system? There is something kind of fun about playing these games, even though I had a miserable time recording the footage. As always, let me know in the comments below. I'd like to thank my sexy patron for his support, and you too can join my Patreon, where I have reviews too hot for YouTube, podcasts, gaming challenges and more. Links in the description below. On screen now you can see where else you can follow me, so why not do so? I've got plenty of great content for everyone to enjoy. And now what's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.